Imagine strapping yourself into a giant metal tube, hurling through the sky at 600 miles an hour, and still finding the time to complain that the windows don't roll down. That's air travel in a nutshell. The miracle of human engineering reduced to Yelp reviews about gravity being too aggressive. People sit in a pressurized cabin, defying physics, crossing continents in hours instead of weeks, and their biggest gripe is that the Wi-Fi isn't fast enough to binge reality TV. These are the same folks who probably think turbulence is just the pilot hitting potholes in the sky. And here's the thing, those are the normal complaints. Because once you hear what some passengers actually demanded, you'll realize we've barely taxied away from the gate. The real absurdity is still cruising at altitude. 1. The flight hadn't left the gate when a man marched up, like he was staging a coup against Newton, and demanded we turn down gravity at cruising altitude because his ears prefer a gentle Earth. And I'm standing there thinking, my guy, if we could dim gravity like a mood light, we'd sell it as premium chill and charge you $79.99 plus a bag fee. He explains he saw astronauts floating on TV, so he knows weightlessness is available. Like it's an in-flight option between chicken or pasta and defy the fundamental forces. When I tell him gravity is kind of a package deal with the planet, he accuses the airline of cheaping out with budget gravity and says competitors offer softer pull closer to the ground. I consider pitching him a revolutionary product called the Aisle, where the gravitational experience is exactly the same, just with more legroom. He finally threatens a complaint because he paid for the sky, not the rules. And I nod politely, because if there's one thing that never flies in an airplane, it's common sense without a boarding pass. 2. A woman filed an official request to have her window rolled down a crack for fresh air. Just a crack, she emphasized, like she was responsibly venting a parked car for a labradoodle. Because, and this part is art, she runs hot, and the cabin air tastes reheated. I explained that at 35,000 feet, the outside air is negative what your soul can handle, and the pressure drop would yeet us into a viral documentary. But she counters with, I open my car window at 80 miles per hour, and it's fine, which is like comparing a paper cut to a guillotine. Apparently, the solution is a small hinge and trust, plus maybe a little mesh screen so the wind isn't too loud. She then pivots to requesting we at least crack the cockpit window, as if the pilots are just hoarding breeze. When physics refuses to negotiate, she asks for a partial refund for the stale air experience. And I, in my most soothing flight attendant voice, offer her the only opening we can safely provide, the tiny nozzle above her seat and the gaping void of logic behind this entire conversation. 3. A gentleman in a sport coat, always the sport coat, insisted we reroute mid-flight to avoid turbulence because he had important spreadsheet work and couldn't be expected to type while the sky did potholes. He explains that good pilots just drive around the bumpy parts, like we're on a suburban shortcut, avoiding speed humps and not flying through an atmosphere the size of several countries. He points at a patch of blue outside his window and declares it smooth air, which is adorable, like spotting peace in a war by looking at one calm street. I offer the standard sermon: invisible air currents, weather systems, jet streams, physics doing CrossFit. He counters with, then go lower, as if we're crouching to sneak under the wind. When the seatbelt sign dings, he gives a TED talk about customer rights and then suggests we turn on the stabilizers, like some mythical anti-shake filter we just forgot to tap. I would offer him a runway made of silk if it existed, but all I can hand him is ginger ale, patience, and the reminder that turbulence is the sky's way of shaking loose the entitlement. 4. During boarding, a passenger asks if our meteorology department can delay the storm over Cancun by a couple hours, so her beach photos have a warmer vibe. And I swear I thought it was satire until she showed me her shot list. She insists that the airline sold sun as part of the brand, and therefore owes her weather consistency, like we keep a big hairdryer under the wing. When I explain we move planes, not clouds, she asks to escalate to whoever's in charge of the sky. And I, doing customer service triage, offer a seat far from the window, instant blue skies if you squint hard enough. She threatens a lawsuit for climate negligence and suggests adding rain insurance to tickets, which, to be fair, would print money if we also sold gravity insurance and time zone forgiveness. In the end, she settles for a free umbrella from the Lost and Found and a selfie in front of the jet engine, which is great because on Instagram, nobody can hear the thunder, and reality is just a filter we refuse to acknowledge. 5. A man claimed he got altitude sickness in a pressurized cabin and demanded we fly closer to the ground where the air is real, like we're a sightseeing bus that just happens to weigh 100 tons. He tells me other airlines cruise at building height, and he never gets headaches there, probably because those flights live only in his fan fiction. I explain cabins are pressurized to feel like a mountain town, not Mars, and he nods with the patience of a guru before asking if we can open the pressure valve a smidge, which is the aviation equivalent of remove one Jenga block. What's the worst that could happen? He proposes a compromise, fly as low as legally allowed, which in his mind is like 2,000 feet, and I picture us threading streetlights like Spider-Man. When we land, he triumphantly announces he endured the airline's oxygen austerity program, then asks for compensation in the form of unlimited lounge access to recover. And I think, sure, sir, enjoy the pretzels that were definitely grown at sea level to maintain your delicate equilibrium. 6. Mid-cruise. A passenger hits the call button to ask why the engines sound so engine-y and whether we can switch them to eco-quiet mode so he can pretend he's on a train. He recommends mufflers like his sedan has, because cars are basically small planes if you think about it, which is precisely why you should never think about it. I describe gently the physics of fire and air being violently blended and shoved backward so we don't plummet. And he listens the way people listen to podcasts at 1.5 times, catching vibes, dodging facts. He suggests we play calming ocean sounds over the speakers to cover the industrial noise, as though audio wallpaper will hush a jet turbine. Finally, he proposes a coasting period, a silent glide to let everyone meditate. And I agree, absolutely. We'll do that right after we complete the one job engines have, which is not killing us. In the end, he settles for noise-canceling headphones and a moral victory. He made his voice heard, even if the engine politely drowned it out. 7. A frequent flyer storms on board waving a smartwatch like a warrant, accusing us of stealing 3 hours from his life on a New York-LA trip. Time zones, he says, are a corporate strategy, a phrase that should come with a laugh track. He wants those hours credited back as sleep vouchers, because biology obeys loyalty programs. I pull up the world map, which he treats like an elaborate marketing brochure, and he explains the Earth could rotate the other way for once, like we've tried lefty-loosey and should now attempt righty-tighty. He cites a buddy who flew the same route on an airline with better routes that don't cost time, which is an amazing promise I hope they sell next to their unicorn boarding group. When we land, he demands documentation that his hours will be returned on the red-eye, and I assure him, yes, absolutely. Please stand by your clock tomorrow and watch the miracle of refunded existence in real time. He leaves satisfied, which is proof that belief is the strongest frequent flyer currency of all. 8. A couple asks if we can dim the sun on their side of the aircraft because it's hitting the selfie wrong. And I want to tell them we absolutely can if they'd like to orbit backward. Instead, I gesture to the shade, which they dismiss as DIY, then request we rotate the plane a few degrees counter-glare, as if we're a lazy Susan and not 200 souls in a pressurized dart. They suggest a sun curtain mounted externally, basically sunglasses for the fuselage, where I explain the only thing we install outside the plane is nope. They counter with buying the row across the aisle and having me reposition the sky by asking the pilots to take the scenic route. And I picture our flight path doodling like a toddler's Etch-a-Sketch. In the end, I flip off the overhead light and offer them a complimentary nap. They accept, then wake up beaming, certain we found the angle. And honestly, in a way, we did. The one where sleep fixes everything and nobody has to wrestle the sun. 9. Somewhere over Nebraska, a passenger rings to request one more stop after Denver, specifically Tulsa, because he left something important there once. And, I mean, who among us hasn't left dignity in a Midwestern city? He frames it as a tiny detour, like asking an Uber to swing by a drive-thru, then sweetens the deal by promising to clap when we land, which I assure him is priceless, just not in the currency fuel burns. When I explain routes are filed with the FAA and not decided by vibes, he goes into negotiation mode, offering a group buy if enough people vote for Tulsa like it's a destination DLC. He suggests we run a quick cabin poll, majority rules, democracy takes flight. I decide not to tell him democracy famously struggles at 500 knots, He finally asks if he can at least hop off midair if we pass close. And I say yes. The door is right there. Just sign this waiver titled Physics. And suddenly the nonstop doesn't sound so bad. He sulks, then orders a tomato juice like a man rebuilding from rock bottom. 10. A self-identified food temperature activist complains that the in-flight pasta is served at airplane heat instead of restaurant heat, which is news to me because I didn't realize we had two thermometers, one labeled Sky and one labeled Olive Garden. He insists we put it back on high as if the galley is a Tuscan kitchen and not a stainless steel closet trying to warm 100 meals on a power budget smaller than a blender. He recommends we bring a grill, like tailgaters, or at least a sous vide, and I promise to pitch that at the next safety meeting right after the item called Candles on the Tray Table. He offers a workaround. Let him use his own lighter under the foil just to finish it, and I, lover of life and eyebrows, decline. He then demands raw materials so he can build a sandwich at his seat to spec, which, you know what, King? Live your deli truth. He eats, survives, and later reviews us online as lukewarm, which is fair because that's how we feel about him too. 11. A tech bro asks if the Wi-Fi has a no-lag guarantee because he needs to pitch investors from row 22, which is adorable given that our router is basically a brave little toaster slinging packets at satellites. He wants us to prioritize his bandwidth since his call is world-changing, and I'm like, sir, so is the bathroom line right now. He proposes we pause everyone else's internet, freeze them, like Thanos, but for Netflix, and funnel the sky into his laptop. And while I appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit, we run a socialism model up here. Your memes share a lane with his spreadsheets. When the connection blips, he accuses us of throttling innovation, and I consider telling him we're actually fighting cosmic rays and mountains and weather and, occasionally, geese with opinions. I offer a phone hotspot once we land, which he treats like walking when there are cars. He ends the flight muttering that the future will be Wi-Fi perfect. And I hope he's right, because nothing would make me happier than a world where the only buffering is his personality. 12. A passenger complains the plane shape is too planey and not sleek like the space shuttles, which is a great note for our design team in 2003. He demands to know when we'll upgrade the skins to something sexier, like we're pushing a firmware update to the fuselage. I mention wings are that shape because physics enjoys living, and he suggests we at least add some fins, which would look rad until they shear off at Mach you tried. He recommends a glass floor to feel the journey, and I nod, picturing 150 people discovering acrophobia together. He then floats the idea of standing sections, like a concert, to reduce fares, and I consider telling him his knees will unionize. Eventually, he lands on the master solution. Make it more like a Tesla, which is accurate in one way. We both suffer from people who think road metaphors solve the sky. We touch down safely in our boring, efficient tube, and he deplanes disappointed that we didn't cosplay Star Wars. I, however, am thrilled. We stuck with the least cinematic shape, the one that works. 13. A mother asks if we can refrigerate her child briefly because he runs hot and the cabin is too tropical, which is a phrase I've only heard used to describe smoothies. I suggest removing the puffer jacket, an avant-garde cooling technique, but she prefers environmental solutions, like lowering the cabin temperature to sweater weather for everyone. I explain that 180 humans exist along a spectrum from I'm a penguin to install lava, and we aim for the middle. She counters by requesting we store him in the overhead for the breeze, which is the first time I've had to say children are not carry-ons out loud. We compromise on ice water and the miraculous vent knob, a tiny god above every seat. 10 minutes later, she reports success. Child reclassified from volcano to warm cookie, and thanks me for recalibrating the climate. I don't correct her. If motherhood is 90% confidence and 10% snacks, flight attending is 90% nodding and 10% preventing new episodes of the Darwin Awards. 14. A man rings to ask if the captain can swing by the Grand Canyon for a better view like last time. There was no last time, unless it happened in a screensaver. He explains he paid for a window and expects content, which is honestly a devastatingly accurate summary of modern life. He proposes a gentle S-curve over the canyon, which is adorable because our filed route is about as flexible as a tax audit. He suggests we just say we hit a headwind to the FAA, a sentence that deserves community service. I offer him the pro move. Look out the window at literally any point. Free geography, batteries included. He pouts and says he'll tweet corporate. And I imagine a social media manager sighing into a coffee and drafting, "We value your feedback." Later, I catch him photographing the wing like it's a rare bird, and he grins. "Nailed it," he says. And in that moment, the Grand Canyon in his heart is 27 inches of aluminum and one very cooperative cloud. 15. Right after takeoff, a passenger demands to stand during the climb because sitting crimps his creativity, and the phrase "gravity and angle of attack" bounces off him like a Nerf dart. I explain the seatbelt sign is not a suggestion but a pact with destiny, and he counters that he stands on trains, which is true, as are squirrels. And yet, here we are. He quotes a productivity guru about never sitting when you could be rising, and I glance at the ceiling panels like, "Sir, we are all literally rising." He argues the belt restrains the muse, and I offer him a napkin, the original canvas of ideas, plus a pen that doesn't leak, unlike his logic. When we hit a jitter, he yelps, then glares at the plane for undermining his posture, and I resist, saying, "The sky wrote back." At 10,000 feet, the ding sounds like freedom's bell. He stands, stretches, and announces to row 14 that he's back online, which is hilarious because all anyone wanted was a silent scroll and a pretzel. 16. A passenger asks if we can hold a departure because his friend is 5 minutes away, which in airport time is somewhere between tomorrow and bring a tent. I explain we're a bus schedule married to rocket fuel, and he calls me heartless, which is fair, but the runway doesn't run on friendship. He proposes we just move the plane a little and open the door again, like we're parallel parking, and I explain once we push back, the logistics go from complicated to summon a committee. He then asks if the pilot can do a loop on the taxiway until his friend arrives, which would be a fun YouTube title. We drifted a 737. Boarding closes, the jetway pulls, and he sighs like the protagonist of a tragic romance whose lover was thwarted by TSA. 30 minutes into the flight, he's fine, laughing at a sitcom, because grief in economy lasts exactly one beverage service. We land, and he texts, "Made it," and I hope his friend did too, somewhere, on some flight that doesn't wait for anybody, least of all the plot. 17. A wellness influencer in Seat 9C requests odorless fuel because the scent of Jet A disrupts her chakras, and, if possible, could we switch to electric for takeoff? Which is the first time I've ever wanted to introduce someone to a physics professor as a therapist. She proposes we add essential oils to the fuel, lavender kerosene, a bold new terroir, and I consider the branding. Calm, now with combustion. I explain the fuel is the same stuff that makes up happen, and we keep it far from your nose on purpose. She suggests we tow the plane to 10,000 feet with another plane that smells better, which is a matryoshka doll of no. Finally, she asks for a seat swap, away from the engine, and I grant it because placebo is the most renewable energy source on Earth. Post-landing, she reports feeling lighter after the odor intervention, and I smile, thinking yes, that was the lack of 500 miles per hour fire 30 feet from your head. Sometimes the cure is science, and sometimes it's distance with you. 18. A man once demanded we stop mid-flight so he could step out for a smoke. He explained that trains have smoking cars, so planes should too, preferably one with a sliding door and a little balcony. I told him the balcony at 35,000 feet comes with a complimentary face peel and an express ticket to the afterlife. He said he'd be careful, as if nicotine addiction makes you immune to explosive decompression. His grand solution? Just hover in place while he has a puff. Like we're a flying Uber and he's on a quick errand. By the time we landed, he was sulking, chain vaping in the terminal like a man who had survived the great injustice of no balcony access. 19. A woman rang her call button because she wanted to know if the flight attendants could turn the plane around so she could have a better view of the sunset. She wasn't joking. She said the sun looked prettier from the other side and thought a quick loop would be worth it for the experience. I tried to explain that we're not a revolving restaurant in Vegas. We're 200 people in a tube burning thousands of gallons of fuel an hour. She suggested we do a half circle, like she was ordering geometry instead of physics. I finally offered the cheaper alternative. Stand up, cross the aisle, and voila. The Sun's free trial, now with 100% fewer fuel surcharges. 20. One guy refused to buckle his seatbelt because, in his words, God is my seatbelt. I told him God might be busy holding the wings on, but he still refused, saying it was a freedom issue. Fine. Except when we hit turbulence, he clutched the armrest so hard his knuckles turned into chalk. Apparently, divine seatbelts don't come with shoulder straps. He landed safely, declared victory, and strutted off like he had personally beaten Newton's laws in court. I can't wait for him to try that same argument in a car crash. 21. A passenger once demanded that we quiet the clouds because they were too loud against the fuselage. Yes, apparently he believed clouds bark when struck. He said he paid for serenity, not nature's percussion section. I explained that clouds are made of water vapor, not drum kits, but he said he could hear them knocking. I wanted to tell him that was just the sound of his brain begging to be returned to sender. Instead, I offered earplugs, which he rejected because the airline should silence nature, not the customer. If we could silence nature, sir, you wouldn't exist to complain. 22. A family insisted we make a pit stop so their toddler could pee in a normal bathroom. They argued that airplanes should have rest areas like highways. I reminded them the restroom was 10 feet away. They said no. Those are sky bathrooms, not real bathrooms. They wanted tiled floors, paper towel dispensers, and a sink. That doesn't look like a science experiment. I suggested closing their eyes and pretending. Instead, they sulked and kept chanting "real bathroom," like it was a hostage negotiation. 23. A passenger once demanded to know if we could turn down the altitude because his Fitbit thought he was climbing stairs too fast. He showed me the little heart rate monitor and said the plane was ruining his streak. He wanted us to drop a few thousand feet, so it counts as flat steps. I told him I admired his commitment to fake internet points, but unfortunately the laws of aerodynamics don't bend to Fitbit algorithms. He called it step fraud and vowed to report us to the app people. Now, I hope they gave him the badge for delusional cardio. 24. A woman once asked if we could stop the plane because she saw a really nice lake below and wanted a quick swim. I told her that unless she had wings, she'd be practicing the world's fastest belly flop. She shrugged and said, "Well, we could just circle back later." Yes, because rerouting a 737 is basically like circling back to Target because you forgot toothpaste. She seemed genuinely disappointed that no one else wanted to stretch their legs in the lake. I offered her extra bottled water. She said it wasn't the same. 25. A man complained that the captain didn't personally come out and greet him. He said since he paid for the flight, he should meet the driver. I explained that the captain was busy flying the plane, but he wasn't impressed. He said it was bad manners, like skipping a handshake at a wedding. His parting shot: "I'll only fly airlines where the pilot thanks me in person." I can't wait for him to meet Spirit Airlines, where the closest thing to pilot interaction is praying they show up sober. 26. A passenger demanded to know why the clouds didn't have Wi-Fi. He believed the signal should bounce off them like satellites. I told him clouds were water vapor, not routers. He insisted that if God could make clouds fluffy, he could at least make them signal-friendly. He then asked if we could fly closer to the internet. I almost said yes. That's called landing. 27. A woman once wanted to know if we could turn off the seatbelt sign just for her because she felt restricted. I explained turbulence doesn't discriminate, but she insisted she had good balance from years of yoga. She demonstrated by standing in tree pose in the aisle, wobbling like a leaf in a hurricane. When we hit a bump, she fell into the drink cart, creating what I call the world's first downward splash dog. 28. A businessman once demanded an express lane to the bathroom. He argued that his bladder was VIP and deserved priority over the commoners. He wanted a system where he could swipe his AMEX and skip the line like it was Disneyland. When I told him the line was 3 people deep, he sighed, muttering about inefficient bladder logistics. Yes, sir. Please file a formal complaint with your kidneys. 29. A man once complained that the stars outside his window looked too fake. He said they were obviously stickers the airline used to make passengers feel safe. He wanted proof they were real. I told him to wait a few billion years and check the receipts. He sulked, saying other airlines have more authentic stars. NASA would like a word. 30. A passenger demanded to know why the plane didn't have an outdoor deck. She said she loves feeling the breeze and wanted a section of the plane like a cruise ship. I said, "Sure, ma'am, We'll install a deck right next to the engine so you can enjoy a complimentary tornado facial." She looked at me dead serious and said, "That's exactly what I'm looking for." 31. A man once refused to turn off his phone during takeoff because he said, "If the plane crashes, I want to live stream it." He said it would go viral and he'd be famous posthumously. I told him that Wi-Fi cuts out anyway, so his viewers would just see a frozen frame of his dumb face. He looked genuinely crushed, like I'd stolen his shot at internet immortality. 32. A passenger asked if we could fly lower so the view is better for her Instagram. I said, "We'd love to, but unfortunately her aesthetic doesn't override federal law." She pouted, saying, "The lighting is better down there." "Yes, ma'am, so is the landing." 33. A man once asked if the airline could fly around the moon on his way from Chicago to Orlando. He believed it's just a small detour and that people would appreciate the view. I explained that unless he had $6 billion and a SpaceX contract, he'd have to settle for the in-flight magazine. He looked disappointed, like we'd robbed him of his Buzz Aldrin moment. 34. Finally, a woman once asked if the plane could go invisible for a little while so she could see what it feels like. I wanted to tell her yes, we'll just flip the Harry Potter switch near the cockpit. Instead, I told her we'd try it after dark. She smiled, convinced she'd flown on an invisible plane. Honestly, it's the only time customer satisfaction has ever depended on pure delusion. And I almost admire that. 35. A passenger once demanded that we stop serving pretzels because they make people thirsty and instead hand out tiny cubes of steak. He said it was basic hospitality, like we were a flying Brazilian grill and not a budget airline with a microwave that cries every time it's turned on. He even suggested we install grill zones in the galley so passengers could watch their meat cooked live, like Benihana at 35,000 feet. I told him our fire policy didn't allow open flames in the sky, but he said, "What if you just promise to be careful?" Yes, sir, nothing says safe aviation like propane and turbulence. His final proposal was for us to hand out raw cuts and let passengers cook them on the wing during descent. Honestly, at that point, I wanted to hand him the emergency exit handle and say, "Dinner served." 36. A woman once brought her emotional support iguana aboard and demanded we adjust the cabin temperature to dessert levels. She insisted the current climate was chilly and unwelcoming, and the iguana deserved a habitat, not cold oppression. I explained that 200 humans would prefer not to be roasted alive for the comfort of one sun lizard. She huffed, claiming airlines were speciesist and that in 10 years, reptiles would have their own rights movement. The iguana, meanwhile, was staring at me with the dead-eyed expression of someone who knows he was dragged into nonsense he didn't sign up for. When I suggested wrapping him in a blanket, she snapped, "He doesn't wear polyester." Right, because nothing screams authentic desert vibes like polyester at 500 miles an hour. 37. A man asked if the in-flight movie selection included live local channels so he could keep up with his soap opera in real time. I explained that satellites don't bend reality so he can find out if Rick finally left Sharon. He wasn't satisfied. He wanted us to install an antenna mid-flight, preferably on the tail, so he could watch like a normal person. I told him the plane's entertainment system wasn't Hulu with wings. He then asked if we could pause the flight until his show aired, so he didn't miss anything. That's when I realized he genuinely believed we could put 150 tons of metal on hold like a DVR. He landed furious, muttering about airlines ruining romance, which, considering his attachment was to a fictional couple, was the only romance he had. 38. A family once asked if the crew could stop the announcements because they were too stressful. The ding of the seatbelt sign, the weather updates, the instructions, it was all too much noise. They wanted a silent flight, preferably with text-only updates delivered to their phones like a Slack channel. I explained that legally. We need to tell passengers things like, "Put your seatbelt on before physics punishes you." They rolled their eyes, saying it killed the vibe. I considered letting them discover turbulence the natural way, but instead I just smiled and reminded them, if silence is your priority, maybe don't buy a ticket for a giant metal megaphone full of strangers hurtling through storms. 39. A passenger once asked if the crew could spray Febreze in the cabin every 20 minutes to keep it fresh. He described the air as stale, which, fun fact, is the technical term for recycled oxygen that's literally keeping you alive. He then offered his own bottle of fabric refresher as a backup solution. I told him aerosol sprays aren't allowed because fire and lungs don't mix, but he said, "What about just one big candle?" "Yes, sir, because nothing pairs better with jet fuel than an open flame aromatherapy session." His backup idea? Replacing the oxygen masks with scented mist diffusers. If irony could kill, he'd be the first man to suffocate under the soothing lavender mist of his own design. 40. Someone once asked if the airline could install windows on the floor so passengers could look straight down at the earth. He argued it would be more immersive and make people feel like birds. I told him birds don't pay $400 to stare at farmland. He said it was the future of aviation and compared it to VR headsets. Except this headset was the literal crust of the earth. I pointed out that glass floors might not comfort passengers already nervous about heights. He shrugged and said, "They'll get used to it." That's like saying people will get used to a guillotine if you put a nice frame around it. 41. A woman once asked if the plane could fly in circles above her destination until her Uber arrived. She said she didn't want to wait in the airport like a normal person. She genuinely thought we could just loop the city like a circling hawk while she checked the app. I explained that airplanes don't hover like drones and that airports exist for a reason. She frowned and said, "So basically, you're making me waste time." Yes, ma'am. That's the whole point of airports. Glorified waiting rooms with $9 coffee. 42. A man once requested that the pilots stop flying over oceans because he can't swim. He said it made him nervous knowing there's nothing but water underneath. I told him we fly at 35,000 feet, and his swimming skills aren't relevant unless he can also breathe in space. He suggested rerouting flights around the edges of continents so everyone could stick close to land just in case. That's like asking a subway train to take a scenic detour through someone's backyard. He spent the whole flight clutching a life jacket like it was going to double as scuba gear. 43. A passenger once asked if we could pause the plane midair so she could FaceTime a friend without background noise. She said the engine roar was ruining the call. I told her we can't exactly hit mute on thousands of pounds of exploding jet fuel. She asked if we could at least pull over somewhere quiet. "Yes, ma'am. Let me just swing this Boeing into a Starbucks drive-thru so you can gossip in peace." 44. A man asked why we don't serve drive-thru food on board. He wanted McDonald's, specifically, and suggested we swing past one on the way up. I told him airports have food courts for exactly this reason. He replied, "Yeah, but I didn't want it then, I want it now." When I explained that airplanes don't pull up to Golden Arches midair, he sighed like we had failed him personally. His final suggestion, parachute and Happy Meals during flight. If I had the budget, I'd have happily strapped him to one. 45. A passenger once asked if the crew could turn the plane invisible so he could prank his friends on Snapchat. He said it would be so funny if people saw him floating in the sky. I told him invisibility wasn't available unless he'd booked Hogwarts Air. He grumbled, saying, "Technology's just lazy now." Sir, we've mastered flying metal tubes across continents. If you need invisibility too, maybe stick to Marvel movies. 46. A woman insisted her ticket entitled her to first dibs on clouds. She said she should get to choose which clouds we fly through because she likes the fluffier ones. I explained clouds are water vapor, not cotton candy samples at Costco. She didn't care. She wanted a softer-looking route and even asked if she could book premium clouds next time. Honestly, if we put that on the website, half of Instagram would buy it. 47. A passenger once asked if we could delay takeoff until Mercury was no longer in retrograde. She claimed it was unsafe to travel when the stars are misaligned. I told her physics doesn't consult astrology before granting lift. She countered with, "But airlines always crash during retrograde," which, spoiler, is not how statistics work. She demanded we consult an astrologer before boarding, like NASA does mission control. When I said NASA doesn't use horoscopes, she gasped like I'd confessed to murder. 48. A man once asked if we could dim the moonlight. He said it was shining too aggressively through his window. I told him that unfortunately our dimmer switch doesn't control celestial bodies. He suggested a ladder and a tarp, which is a bold strategy considering the ladder alone would weigh more than the drink cart. He sulked the rest of the flight under a blanket, muttering about moon intrusion, as though the cosmos had personally wronged him. 49. A woman once demanded we fly around the turbulence because she paid for smooth air. She said it was false advertising to promise comfort, but then deliver bumps. I explained turbulence is like potholes in the sky, unavoidable and random. She huffed, saying, "Good pilots avoid potholes." I almost offered her a steering wheel just to watch her try to dodge invisible air currents. 50. A passenger once asked if the crew could turn off the engines for a while so he could hear the peace of the sky. I explained that the peace he'd hear would be the silence of freefall. He nodded, then suggested we glide on momentum until we were closer to the ground. If stupidity had gravity, he'd have been the heaviest thing on the plane. 51. And finally, my personal favorite, a man demanded we open the emergency exit mid-flight because he needed some fresh air. Not because of claustrophobia, not because of fear, just because he thought it would be nice. He said, "I'll be quick, just a little breather." Like stepping outside of a moving car, except replace asphalt with stratosphere. I told him opening that door would launch him, his seat, and probably 3 rows of people into orbit. He shrugged and said, "Fine, but next time I'm flying an airline that cares." And honestly, sir, I hope you do. Because the only airline that cares about giving you fresh air at 500 miles per hour is called NASA. And there you have it, proof that air travel isn't powered by jet fuel, but by raw, unfiltered stupidity at cruising altitude. We've survived a parade of demands so absurd they make reality TV look like a documentary. And yet, I know we've only scratched the surface, because somewhere right now, someone's probably demanding extra legroom for their emotional support cactus. So go ahead. Drop the dumbest demand you've ever heard in the comments. Vote on which one deserves its own no-fly list. And if you somehow want more of this chaos, hit that like, subscribe, and buckle up. Trust me, this flight of nonsense is nowhere near its final destination.